When a child kills, why do they kill? Who are they killing? The subtitle of this book by Pocket Books says, Abused Children Who Kill Their Parents. It's by Pocket Books, and Paul Monis is an adjunct professor of law, a children's rights advocate. Has a law degree from the University of North Carolina, and he's the only lawyer in the United States who specializes in defending children who kill their parents. Paul Monis, thank you very much for joining me. Why in the world would anybody dedicate their lives to this kind of subject that isn't the sort of thing you want to come home and talk about at night?
Well, I got involved in this work basically because I work a lot with abused children, and had a case where somebody who was so terribly abused and had really given up all hope and had been abandoned by her friends and clergy members and others ended up having to do the only thing to save her life, and ended up taking her father's life, and found that there was really no support for her. And I became fascinated by the issue of what could turn a purely innocent person who'd never been arrested for a crime in their life, did well in school, attended Sunday school classes, etc., and ended up killing their parent, and found that it wasn't because they were, infected by any kind of, psychiatric disorder, or that they were evil, but rather they just were pushed to the edge.
Now, you tell the story of 8 children who killed their parents, and
Right.
we'll get into that in just a moment, but with regards to the background of information, it appears from your book as though this is not a well-researched subject. It's a phenomenon either society is lately coming to recognize or doesn't want to deal with, and yet there's an historical foundation for all of this. Why are we so slow to recognize this problem? Is the very parasital thought of this beyond our comprehension? Is there some edible reason for this or whatever that we don't want to cope with it?
Yeah, I think that, I don't know if it's Oedipal, but I think what there is basically parasite challenges the very foundation of the parent's right over a child. And I think we all know that everything, whether it's in Western society, from honor thy father and mother to the filial piety that they have in the East, in China and in Japan, that we're taught to revere parents, and that parents are the cornerstone of society. The family is the cornerstone of society, and that the parents, being the heads of that cornerstone, deserve the control that is given them to raise the child. But unfortunately, over the years, that control has been perverted by a number of people, and they take their God-given right as parents. I think it's really a privilege to have a child, and perverting it and using their child for as a piece of furniture, or treating their child sexually exploiting the very person they gave life to, or denigrating them verbally, saying things to them that you wouldn't even think about saying to your worst enemy. Things like "I wish you were never born," et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Now, these are not the kind of cases that we tend to think of where it's some crazed kid who's on drugs, or
No, right,
he's become deranged or psychotic, and there's these wonderful, loving parents, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he blows them away. That's not what we're talking about.
Not yet. And those cases, when you tend to read them in the newspapers, are when you get beyond the headlines and the initial shock, you find that there's a lot more there. So, a lot more there in terms of what's going on in the family. And so, as a result, we don't want to think about what would motivate a kid to kill a parent. We want to blame it on other things, such as, the kid wanted money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, or the kid was psychotic. And really, there are many, many more children who are killed by their parents every year. The estimates are as high as 5,000 children, most under the age of 3 years old, are killed by their parents every year in the United States. There are 2.5 million cases of abuse in the United States. There are approximately 2% of all the homicides in the United States, which comes out to around 200 to 300 a year, are children who kill their parents. And There is a certain number, a small percentage, who are adults who do tend to kill because they are, something is wrong with them. They are seeking money. They are on drugs.
But that's the minority.
That's the minority, and the majority are people under the age of 19 years old.
Now, this is that's not a comfortable thing for society to talk about, but apparently what you've uncovered here is there's a larger issue of interfamily homicidal impulses,
right,
and that the majority of murders that are taking place, the majority of violent crimes, are not stranger upon stranger.
Right.
The statistics you quote in your book are incredible. 4 out of 5 homicide victims are related to or acquainted with their assailants.
Right.
It's 80% of all killings in the country.
Right. Well, if any of your listeners, or you take any time to just carefully read newspaper articles about murder, you will find that most crimes people are related. They do get those incidents that tend to skew the statistics, like that tragic case in Texas where that guy rammed his car into a restaurant and
right,
shot all people a few months ago. That kind of case is 28 murders of strangers attributed to this one guy. And in those kind of cases, you'll find 28 strange murders, but really most of the murders you read about are, people in a bar or friends or people at work. The postal murders tend to be that, for instance. There's been a rash of postal workers who kill their own friends.
So you're saying those types of dramatic cases get the attention, but what's going on under the surface of society?
Yeah, behind closed doors is a much more insidious and dark.
Who's doing the killing here? Is it the girls? Is it the boys? What
ages?
Boys
kill their fathers. Boys kill their fathers. The average is like a 17-year-old, disproportionately middle-class white kid, upper-class kid who has no involvement with the law, kills his father, typically with a gun his father taught him how to use. You
talk about the profile of kinds of of violence
right,
against children. That there is what you call ordinary violence, severe violence, and
right,
serious violence.
Right.
Talk to me just for a moment about the escalation in terms of the kinds of behavior that kids in America are subjected to.
Well, most people in society, most parents, around 98%, hit their children under the age of 15 years old, or hit at least once a year.
This is a parent who just loses his cool and hits a kid.
No, just talking about people who believe that, I'm talking about all forms of punishment. And then we get into the more serious forms. See, the thing is that we have a notion that, and I'm not saying that parents who spank their child once in a while or are in danger of being shot by their kids. That's not what I'm saying, but that we have an ethic in our country that it's okay to hit your child, even though we know, for instance, if you have trouble with one of your engineers or with a friend or with a person who waits on you in a restaurant or whatever it is, you don't think about turning around, smacking them in the face or hitting them on the behind, because you know that that's wrong and you can get arrested for it and you can get sued for it. And if it's a friend of yours that you hit, or if it's your wife or your one of your friends, they will never talk to you. They'll not talk to you again. But with children, we believe that hitting is okay, and that is the departure point for a lot of abuse that a lot of parents end up, while a lot of parents hit their children and kind of stop at the age of 5 or 6, and it tends to be a hit on the behind or whatever for some infraction. A lot of parents go way beyond that, and not only is in the serious violence, not just using their hand, but they'll use a club, they'll use a whip. There's a difference between, people use whips, people use belts in very different ways. There's a difference between somebody 280 pounds coming from 180 degrees in a full swing with a belt with a buckle against a 4-year-old's behind, and somebody lightly tapping this child, with as much strength as you used to shake somebody's hand. There are differences, but we do have a problem here with people. If you open the door a little bit, then it ends up being opened all the way. And
how many kids in America are victims of what you call serious violence?
Serious violence, it's probably, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's probably 300,000 to 400,000 minimum a year. Now I'm talking about people being hit with a club, or being hit with, being sliced with a knife, being kicked, being punched in the face, that kind of stuff.
I think these just psychotically delusional parents who
are
out of control, or what?
They look very normal on the outside. They just believe they can do whatever they want their kids because that's the way either they were treated, or they believe it's just their right to do anything they want. The line, I brought this child in the world, I can do anything I want.
Are you suggesting that there's a difference between how we view, in the justice system, a parent and what they do in harming, killing, or injuring a child, and what happens when the child, in reverse, harms or injures or kills the parent?
Oh, yeah. There's a big difference. You speak to the average prosecutor, and you'll find that it's very difficult to convict a parent of homicide, even though the parent has been beaten. Let's say cases where a parent beats a child who wets her bed. In a typical case, a 2-year-old who wets her bed. Their case where parents beat the child for 6 hours, killing the child, and the defense argues that the kid was only disciplined. The parent just was disciplining and not in no intent to kill. And juries are much more willing to accept that. And it's very difficult to get a murder 2 prosecution or a murder 1 prosecution for parents who kill their children. Much easier to get. People want to think it was by accident or they were just being excessive. Similarly, we have 2 different standards. I think you brought up a good point. You look at the whole incest area. Well, we, up until the late 1960s in the United States, there was the death penalty for rape. But in the same states that had the death penalty for rape, where a father molested his or her child and produced a baby from that even, where there was incest, the father, if he was ever arrested, only served a couple of 3 years in jail. There was never even anything close to the death penalty. It wasn't even on the books. And so we have 2 different laws, for parents and for adults and for children. And when a child who's been viciously abused by a parent for years takes that parent's life, we come back at that child regardless of their reasons with a vengeance. The system does. So yes, I think there is a double standard.
Now, you talk about the various types of violence of children against their parents, and it was very fascinating to me. The majority of cases are the boys who kill their fathers, but then you have girls killing their mothers, boys killing their mothers, girls killing their fathers, sibling rivalries that result in violence, kids who kill the entire family, kids who go out and hire people.
Right.
Is this just a matter of kids who can no longer take it anymore? A lot of this appears to be very carefully constructed on their part.
Yeah, it is. It is carefully constructed, exactly. Very few times do they kill when the child is aggressing against the parent.
So it's not just a matter. It's not an impulse thing. It's very carefully planned.
Most of these cases occur actually when the parent is sleeping or their back is turned or they're cooking dinner or something like that. And the reason for that is that these children live under constant fear. And they know that if they attempt to take their parents' lives when the parent is beating them or molesting them, that the parent will succeed in defending themselves to the extent of taking the child's life. And the violence visited against a child who has been a victim of thousands of attacks is very different than the violence between, 2 men who, let's say, get into a fight at a bar. Where the traditional self-defense comes in, and you worry, and you know that the kid who, that the person is being attacked has been attacked in the seconds prior to defending him or herself. And these children know, because they've been attacked for so long, have something called hypervigilance, which means they have a finely attuned sense of when they're going to be attacked. And so as a result, they can actually feel and know that the parent will be attacking them in the very, very imminent near future, and they take basically preventive action.
There's a couple of fascinating quotes in your book, and I want to take it directly here. When a child kills his parents, understanding goes out the window, and the system comes back at the child with a vengeance. And as angered as I am by the child abuse, one of the most outlandish and insidious aspects of these cases is the mindless, insensitive, and morally bankrupt reaction of the legal system to the children's plight. The factors that were responsible for the homicide play themselves out in the same cruelty in the trial. With the help of the state, the parent reaches out from the grave to inflict one last act of abuse, the child's prosecution and imprisonment. Are you suggesting, therefore, that in many of these cases the homicidal reaction of the child is justified? What is it that you're wanting the justice system to do by way of reform?
Well, number one, that in terms of reform, I think before a child is prosecuted for killing a parent, that the state investigate the possibilities of abuse, and that typically what needs to be done is that the state needs to look into the allegations of abuse, which is very, very rarely done. There are a number of prosecutors around the country who do that. But what I am saying is that children who are forced into a position, and I think, right off the top, I want to say that it's a blasphemy, on the human soul to take a human life. I think that's wrong, and I believe that homicide on any level is wrong, but that people are forced into situations society recognizes all the time about defending oneself, and it's hard to think about a child having to defend oneself against a parent, but the fact of the matter is that unfortunately happens, and I think that all I'm saying is that we need to look at that as a possibility.
But you do say in your book, I'm going to quote you, I fervently believe that victims of child abuse are entitled to do anything necessary to free themselves from their tyranny.
Right, but before that I say that the homicide is wrong, right, but that they should not have to resort to homicide.
Well, what is a child to do in a situation?
Well, what the problem is children can't do too much. What we need is to have friends and neighbors and teachers and others get involved when they see a parent abusing a child, and because the child cannot act on his or her own.
I think one of the more poignant pleas you have is where you point out that our country, as you say, does a great job of, quote, promoting its image as a youth culture and selling products to young people, but an absolutely terrible job of enriching their minds and nurturing their souls. You can talk about the huge amount of monies spent in advertising. I mean, we want these kids to buy video games and movie tickets and so on.
Let me give you some interesting statistics, okay? And I read this on an airplane recently. The direct purchases of candy, ice cream, and soda by children, this is not what their parents buy for them, every year in the United States, and snacks, is $2 billion a year. The direct purchases of video games, movie tickets, video arcade games, all of the things that, all parents out there and know their kids want to buy, is $2.7 billion a year. That what happened in the 1980s in the United States is corporations realized if they cross-promoted products for children with animated features that they could then make a lot more money and change product buying. So, for instance, today, it's very difficult to find regular Band-Aids for kids. It's Sesame Street Band-Aids, and they have, McDonald's has cross-promoted with commercials, and so kids are being sold and sold and sold and sold, and they also affect the buying habits of their parents. But when it comes to education and it comes to their, protecting their moral fiber, I think that we do and I think it's an embarrassing job. And I also want to say, though, I don't think a lot of people around one thing about America is that everything is out front. Around the rest of the world, they're not as honest as we are here. And abuse exists in other countries. Even parricide exists in other countries. I did an interview with Radio Free Europe recently, and the woman there told me now that, in this deep Russian accent, now that we have our freedom here, we want to start looking at the freedom of children who have been abused for years, and nobody ever said anything about it. And I think that that's an important thing we have to realize. That's something I want to say at the beginning, that, it's the reporting is very high. We have good reporting here. We have, people willing at least to talk about the problem, and that's a lot more to say than 99% of the world.
You raise an interesting concept, and that concept, Paul, is what you call poly-abuse.
Right.
The kind of chaos and persecution that these kids go through is not single-faceted. There are many aspects,
right.
Physical, emotional, sexual. That blows the minds of a lot of people because they may think of this as a one-dimensional issue. But you say these kids who kill have been pushed to the limit by such a wide range of abuses that their desensitization as human beings is almost total.
Right. I mean, what they do is they not only have themselves been abused, but they typically have their mothers or fathers, in certain cases, have been battered by the spouse. They watch, many cases where teenage girls kill their fathers, they watch their little sisters being molested by their fathers, and they want to protect them. Or boys who kill their fathers watch their mothers being beaten.
So it's not always the abuse perpetrated on them. Sometimes they're acting in defense of a sibling?
Right. Or defense of a parent. Right.
The youngest, you say, 3 years of age?
Yeah, that was a fluke, but I mean, I think it happened in Detroit where a father was beating a mother, and as typically happens in these cases, there's guns all over the house, loaded, not being protected, and as weapons should be, or kept away from children. And the father was beating the mother, and the 3-year-old said, "Stop hitting mommy, stop hitting mommy." And the father had threatened with guns in the past. And this time the kid picked up the gun, and it was obviously on a hair trigger or whatever, and he pulled the trigger back and fired one shot into the father's back and killed him.
Now, so that people understand, these are not kids who have just suffered a few insults or a couple of the backsides of the hands.
Beaten and molested for, at least a dozen years.
And you talk about, it's not just even a father raping his child; he's threatening to kill her. I mean,
right at the same time.
A mother locking her child in a closet for 8 hours a day. These kids have been pushed beyond the limits of human endurance.
Well, that's exactly right.
Also, you point out that the victims, the parents who are killed, these are not the scumbags of society. Often very successful people who have perfectionist impulses.
Right. Correct. That's right.
Why is it that we would rather think of them as being awfully low life?
Oh, I think that's just the myth of child abuse, that we like to think it occurs in the backwoods, and it occurs, in people living in shacks, and that's the image of, I think incest maybe for some reason. I lived and worked in Appalachia for a number of years, and there was a notion I always knew when I left the area of, that's where all the abuse and incest is, and the incidence of incest there is just as much in the big cities as it is in the small towns. It's just that's what our notion is, and we don't like to think that abuse sullies the reputation of of more upstanding people. You can just see from reading the newspapers that there are people who are from all classes of society who have problems, but we just don't like to focus on the people who are the gainfully employed, or even better than gainfully employed, people who are the heads of businesses, etc., for doing anything morally wrong like that.
Well, the psychological profile was very interesting. You say it's a psychoanalyst nightmare because these are not adults, the ones who get killed, the ones that the children are pushed to the breaking point to finally do them in. They are not just universally, unilaterally evil toward their children. There's this hate-love thing, love and devotion with a tremendous undercurrent, you say, of hate and resentment. There's a terrible cycle here. It's just not totally one-sided.
Right, exactly. And the parents often are visiting their nightmares of their childhood on their children, and that's the tragedy, is you always find abuse that's occurred in the past.
And to the outside, what does it look like? This was fascinating to me. From the outside, people don't see what's going on because it looks like the parents and the children have a normal, close relationship.
Mm-hmm. That's right. It looks like, because the problem is that these parents, when they abuse their children, often bind them to them much more closely than even the typical, quote, normal family. The parent is with the child all the time. These children have very kind of complying personalities. They do things to please people. They never speak back to their parents. They don't sass their parents. They don't curse their parents. They are quiet, almost obsequious in the parents' presence and other adults' presence. So it looks, and the parent is always, carries photos of his kid, or she goes to school every few days to talk to the teachers about the child's performance, and it looks from the outside like, hey, this is, Ozzie and Harriet here.
But is the child being treated like an object? Is the desensitization also on behalf of the parent who is looking at the child? I think you use the term in your book that they're just like a piece of furniture. They can move them around, do anything they want to. Is that kind of the underlying current of this, that in spite of the fact there looks like some...
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
So underneath the surface of this familial bond is, in fact, an object kind of relationship. When they hit the kid, they're not really... We think in terms of you're hitting your own flesh and blood. How can you do that? In the mind of the parent, that's not it. And so that distancing allows the child to act dispassionately too, apparently.
Right, that's correct.
This is the end of Side 1. Please turn the cassette over at this point for the continuation of the message on Side 2.
The typical abusive situation, describe it to me. What is it that eventually leads to pushing the kid over the edge to kill?
Well, the thing that pushes the kid over the edge is that the child is usually realizes a change in the type of abuse. The father now, instead of just, because everything gets very routinized, instead of beating the kid for 5 minutes, beats the kid for 30 minutes. Or instead of beating the kid for just coming home late, coming in the house late, beats the kid because he finds a candy wrapper on the floor, or the kid happens to not clean the dish well enough. Or in one case, the father started beating the son one night because his toothbrush was facing backwards as opposed to forwards in the toothbrush holder. Sounds kind of crazy, but these are some of the facts that you deal with. Or the father who is forcing his daughter to have sex with him, and all of a sudden starts treating her in a much more than normal violent way. And they can pick up these cues of change, and that's when they view their survival at stake.
You also point out that when these kids kill their parents, it isn't just walking up and putting a bullet through them and walking away. I mean, they will shoot them repeatedly, they will club them, they will stab them.
Stab them, right.
Is this just the venting of a level of anger that's uncontrollable? Why the overkill?
It's an uncontrollable reaction. What happens is they believe that the parent is really not dead even when they are dead, and they typically, once the gun goes off, and typically it's a gun, they'll empty the whole chamber because or the whole round, the whole cylinder, because they don't have any control almost once they start pulling the trigger.
You point out historically, cross-culturally as well as in the United States, there's some historic precedent for this issue of children being treated in a chattel fashion. It was rather surprising to me to see how long we go back historically with regards to this. Now, the average God-fearing Christian would say, well, honor your father and mother, but apparently, historically, we've taken that far out of context and out of hand in this country.
Yeah, might be referring is back in the 1600s, the Pilgrims here, though they were trying to escape repression in England, came here and enacted some even more serious laws than even the English enacted with regard to children. They basically had something called the Massachusetts Stubborn Child Law, which said that if a child is disobedient of voice to the parent, that the parent could seek any state reprimand they wanted, which did include sometimes death penalty, hanging the child. But often the children were put in stockades or whatever, and these are kids who, at that point, who didn't, quote, listen to their parents fully. Parents have, for a long time, exercised, as we know, control over many aspects of their child's lives, even arranging marriages up until very recently. So what we're seeing now in the dawn of the 21st century, the reason why we're looking back now is we believe that as a society we've come to a point we'll be better off allowing some of these things to come into the open when they get perverted. And so as a result, when the pressures build up and the child takes a parent's life, we no longer view that child as being necessarily a crazy person who deserves to be put in jail for the rest of their lives, but probably has some reason. At least we're looking at the reasons, and that's part of that evolution.
One of the very helpful parts of your book, and For those of you who just happened to join us, this is Paul Monis. He's author of the book When a Child Kills by Pocketbooks. An excellent book. Everyone needs to read this to be aware of the terrible situation of child abuse in our country. You talk about why kids keep quiet, why they don't do anything. Step through some of the reasons of why in these incredibly dehumanizing, violent, torturous, painful situations, a child does nothing.
Yeah, well, number one, they blame themselves. They think if something is wrong, that they did it, that the parent is able to convince the child that if the child is getting beaten or is being molested because it's something that the child did wrong or desires, or that it is, quote, normal. Number two, there's a very strong prohibition that we have in our society about going against your parent. Even a healthy kid has a hard time saying no to mom or dad. Number three, they are fearful. They're often threatened that if they talk, they'll be hurt. And these kids take it very seriously, especially those who worry about their younger siblings. And those are some of the reasons. Basically, embarrassment and fear are the big ones.
And you also point out that it's not just the torturing of the body. You talk about soul murder. You talk about how these kids are treated in such a way that the psychological and behavioral consequences are far more serious than any of the burns and the bruises and the welts are.
Right, exactly, because the child is made to feel as being less than a whole person. And what abuse does is it acts as a corrosive acid on the child's personality.
But don't we have a long-term problem of depression, self-esteem? Aren't we introducing into society the possible, if they don't kill their parents,
then they'll go out and kill somebody else.
Yeah, the criminal orientation of long-term homicidal mentality here.
Right. I think there's that real problem of parents of children who don't kill their parents, which is, of course, the majority of children. And of the millions of kids abused every year, most of them just remain silent about it and never do anything. Very few of them are reported, and very few run away. Most don't do anything. But those who don't do anything to their parents and don't report them, if you look at most people who commit violent crime, I'm not talking about somebody who, breaks into a Fivers and who comes up to you in a parking lot late at night and sticks a gun in your belly, wants your money, person who rapes, the person who commits, basically interpersonal crime. Mm-hmm. That person, by and large, not every time, and I'm not making a, quote, excuse for this person because these are dangerous people, but that person became that way in large part because of how they were treated as a child. And you find that most of the people on death row, the really dangerous, scary people in the United States, do share one thing in common, aside from the fact that they, of their killing, is that they were really brutalized as children. And, as innocent 4- and 5-year-olds, now they have turned it out and become these, really done terrible things to people. Yet, if we are interested as a society in moving kind of forward to a point where we could try to stop some of this, we got to realize that people just, some people are born with personality disorders and they become violent through no fault of their parents at all. But those are a minority.
I've talked to a lot of kids who've been in violently abusive situations, and I don't want to impugn the motives or the kindness of many in the foster care system, because there are many good, kind, loving foster parents out there who are doing their best. But boy, have I heard some horror stories of these kids. I mean, I've heard kids of going to, over the space of their teen years, to 2 or 3 or 4 dozen foster homes, in and out of them, and likely to be re-abused.
Right, you go from the frying pan into the fire.
Yeah. Now, what can we do to get the social service system of foster parenting in this country off on a better foot than it is just yanking these kids from one home to another? I mean,
I think one of the things that I focus on, and I think is something for us to look at, is that we can't rely upon the government as we have up to this point to solve our problem. What we need to do is we need to have intimate friends and relatives intervene early on.
Well, where's the extended family in this situation?
That's what I mean. And there's a lot of times there is no extended family, but one thing my work has taught me is that people do know. People understand and are aware that child abuse is going on. I'll give you a quick story here. There was a case I had where a young girl was beaten by her father, as was her mother, and so was her two young siblings. She was also being molested by her dad. She wanted to go to Baptist class, Sunday morning classes, but her dad wouldn't let her. So the local Baptist minister came to the house with the young girl and her friend, and the young girl went to the other room. The father sat in his easy chair and as the preacher talked to him, he took out a machete and was sharpening it in a very threatening way. And he said, "I see no reason for my daughter to go anywhere, any church, because I am God in this house." The preacher left so afraid that he never went back, never called anybody, never spoke to the man himself, never did anything. And this is not uncommon. And as a result of that happening, the girl was left all by herself. Nobody was going to take care of her. She thought this guy was going to be able to help her. And I've seen the same thing happen with teachers, etc. And she ended up shooting her daddy a year later. And when he was on the stand, he said he felt terrible, but he didn't know what to do, and he didn't think it was right to do any reporting, because he thought probably it was more of this family matter. If that's his decision that she didn't want to have Sunday classes, well, that's the father's decision. And that's the kind of thinking. While I understand the immediacy of maybe being fearful, as this guy was, or as the guidance counselors are, etc., we still need people to be able to stand up, because if they don't stand up for the child, nobody's going to stand up. Well, that's the problem. They're not going to do it themselves.
And Paul, I've talked with other kids too, in a real catch-22 situation. If they don't speak up, the familial violence is perpetrated. If they do speak up, and a social service agency or someone intervenes and doesn't intervene effectively, and the mom and dad smile and gloss everything over and they walk away, then they're in a worse shape than they are before. What encouragement can you give to a kid, telling them effectively how they can speak up?
I think one of the problems is that kids, I don't think we can rely upon kids to speak up. I think it is so impossible for them to do it. But you see, what we need safe houses for children. We need places where kids can go, that if the parents call up and want to find the kid and bring the kid home, the child will be kept in this safe house.
Mm-hmm. Are you saying this ought to be privately, charitably funded, or government funded?
I think they have to be charitably and publicly funded, both. Mm-hmm. I think we need to do both. I think that we need to have children need to know that they're going to be safe, because the big problem is if you report abuse today, there's no guarantee that the state is going to do anything. And the system is really kind of backwards. We really don't have, as I write in When a Child Kills, the government does a great job of protecting banks. There are bank robberies, but not a lot. There used to be a lot of supermarket robberies, and there are not that many anymore. And we do a good thing in protecting people's money, but not protecting people's children. And I think that we need to start looking at other ways. Other things that we need to do, for instance, are making the issue much more publicly discussed. Not that it happens only to them, but it happens to all of us, and that people need to be encouraged to speak out. This next thing we need to do is we need to realize that somebody is not going to become a good parent simply because they have the biological ability to produce a child. Mm-hmm. That's just not true. And I think that we need, without interfering with the parental, religious and other prerogatives, to teach certain parenting things to kids, starting in junior high, about ways of dealing in anything we can do, sort of moral lessons, if that's even possible. Kids need to be taught about parenting, about what you do, why little kids get frustrated, how you deal with frustration.
Where do you want this teaching to take place? I found interesting one of your suggestions, that it be made a mandatory part of the curriculum of schools.
I think it should be. I think we should have it in the school. It'll be controversial, but I think we need, as I said, in balancing, whatever private rights parents have, and as to religion, which I think does need to be kept out of kept in the home, and not be forced upon any child, but that children need to be and I'm talking about, young people coming into junior high school and older, it needs to be taught there. As I said, if we have driver's ed, we should have parent ed.
Yeah, but you really are dealing with something that has spiritual dimensions to it, because you're dealing with the family structure, and religious ideals are going to be hard to separate from this, because the whole idea and the philosophy of parenting is deeply rooted in religious ideals.
You're right about that, but the problem is so terrible of a task to ourselves as a society to start thinking of how we can develop ways to teach people about parenting, and that what was done to you by your parent and it hurt you is not necessarily the way that you should treat your child.
Why isn't the media doing more? I mean, all those cartoons on Saturday morning, MTV has the attention of kids of all ages. It would seem to me there's some responsibility for those who know they have the attention of youth to do something. I mean, MTV has done its Rockers Against Drug ads and public service announcements.
It's easy to be against drugs, and it's easy to be against alcohol abuse than it is in drinking while driving, and it's easier to, what they make a big point of about, and I heard this morning before I was leaving on the TV, some public service announcement about kids not taking rides from strangers. Well, parents have a lot more, children should be a lot more worried about being hurt by their parents or somebody that's an intimate relative than any guy driving, a beat-up Chevy down the street. I mean, the chances of being hurt or abducted or being molested by a stranger are infinitesimal compared to being molested or beaten by somebody who's in the bedroom next door. Yet we don't focus on that at all. We focus on, the thing that has less of a chance of happening.
But isn't there a fear in our society that some rebellious, cantankerous kid who wants to get even with his parents, and we've heard cases of this, goes to some government official, and then you have it.
Yeah, I think you're right. And one of the problems that we have is that child abuse was not dealt with as an issue really effectively until around 1979. And anytime you introduce any new social issue, and you're always going to have people going overboard. And I think in the next 4 to 5 years, you're going to start seeing a much more evening out. And one of the biggest ways the system is misused, I think you bring up a good point, is by parents during divorce proceedings.
Oh, yeah.
They use one child. I can't tell you a number of, typically men who call and say, what about this problem of my kid saying I was sexually abusing him or her? My wife is using this as an excuse, and that typically happens. And so it's not even the children themselves wanting to get back as much as it is parents using their children again as pawns in a chess game of hate with each other, and that's where it happens.
You detail, as I said earlier, a number of cases in your book when a child kills. Out of all of these cases, which we don't have time to go into all of them, which was the one that either was the worst or most deeply touched you personally?
God, it's like asking me which finger on my hand do I like best.
Well, give us an example of one of these cases.
I would say the story of Cindy, who was, a girl from a very, very wealthy family. Her father was a big CEO, a Vietnam veteran, big local volunteer booster in the community. Mother was a successful business person in her own right. Children had two lovely older sisters, and the father was one evening was killed by his youngest daughter, Cindy. And while she initially denied anything went wrong in the family has happened, after an hour worth of questioning, she said her father had sexually assaulted her and detailed a long history of abuse. And it ended up that nobody would help her out. Nobody, because her father was such a, quote, nice guy on the outside. While other people in the system believed her. One of the police officers believed her, and the prosecutor ultimately believed her. Her mother didn't even believe her, and she had to end up changing her. She ended up, after she was served a short period of time in a treatment facility, changed her name and gave up her entire history and moved to another place. And that was very tragic because she had no support of anybody.
As an expert in this area and someone who's not only written a great, wonderful book that I encourage everyone to read, When a Child Kills, published by Pocket Books, just on a personal level, let me ask you to give perhaps an impassioned plea to two classes of people. Let's talk first to the parent who is listening, who maybe didn't have parenting skills, maybe who was abused themselves, and they're listening to this, and before their kid kills them, they recognize after hearing you that things are out of control in the home, that they are being sexually or violently abusive to their child. It would be an embarrassing thing for that parent to come forward, a very difficult thing for them to own up to what they're doing, but what would be your impassioned plea to that parent to get this thing corrected before it's out of hand?
Okay, one of the most important things a parent can do is to, one, accept the fact that they are responsible for what has occurred to their child, that the abuse is not the child's fault, number one. Number two, there is an organization called Parents Anonymous, and that phone number is 1-800-421-0353. And there is another number as well for information on resources for help, and that's sponsored by Child Help USA. And it's a 1-800 number, and it'll give you services in your local area. That number for Child Help USA is 1-800, the number 4-A-CHILD. So you just spell out A-CHILD, 1-800-4-CHILD. And those two organizations will help lead you in the right direction. I think the thing to tell these parents is that it's never too late to stop what you're doing, that you and your child can repair the damage, but the problem is that your child is thinking things and feeling ways that you could never imagine. And I'm not talking about killing the parent, but I'm talking really about dying inside. Because most parents listening to this, even if they're being violently assaultive to their children, have no concern whatsoever about being killed by their child, because most children won't do it. Just that's their natural response, not to do it, to accept everything that happens to them, and that it's important to break the cycle. And to the extent that they break the cycle, that they are brave people. I can't tell you the number of people who come to me after reading my book and who have never even thought about killing their parents, but who are in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, and say, I remember what it was like. And when I read your book, I realized how much I had buried and how troubled I am today about my own life, because I never dealt with the problem of my own abuse. Because chances are, if somebody's abusing their child, they have been abused themselves, and, as I said earlier, visiting the nightmares of their childhood on their children.
Your impassioned plea for the child who is listening, who was in that prison of pain, physical and emotional, perhaps sexual torment, and is really very scared that if they speak up, it'll only get worse, that the parent will only retaliate, that they won't be believed. Your plea to that child is what?
I think the plea to that child is to realize that you must go to a friend or a teacher or a doctor or anybody you know who is an adult, because the chances are is it's only going to get worse. Your mom and dad are not going to get better, and it's not your fault, and that you were born a good person, and that the only thing left for you to do is realize that your mom or dad needs help, and that you need as well to, if you can, think about making a phone call, to call the number of the social service agency that's listed in the front of your phone book, or call the 1-800-4-A-CHILD phone number to get help. That and as every kid, as you know in reading my book, every kid has said, taking my parent was wrong, and I regret doing it, and nobody should do what I did. And that's the message that should go out. And that only when they are at the worst straits, when nobody else will help them, have they been forced into this position. And the thing is when they take their parents' lives, the tragedy is that they have sentenced themselves as soon as they fired the gun, because they end up living life in their own mental prison, regardless of what society does to them. And that's what I would basically end off in saying. And again, to that third group, maybe, to the friends and relatives who realize something's going on, and they feel it going on. It's sort of like the old line, I can't define pornography, but I know it when I see it. The same thing is true with abuse. And if you know it when you see it, realize that child is not going to have a chance to say anything, and you have to be that child's voice.
Paul Monis, thank you. It
Thank
is
you.
a wonderful book, When a Child Kills. The answer for America and society in general to deal with this problem. How can we wake up?
Right. And how we can wake up is by confronting the truth that children are our most precious our most precious resource, and we need to do to preserve our future. We need to preserve the health and moral fiber of our children, and the best way to do it is not to abuse them.
Thank you very much for your time, sir. It's a great book. I enjoyed reading it, and I enjoyed talking with you, and I appreciate your joining me.
Thank you.
This is the end of the message. For further information regarding other topics available on cassette and in printed form, write Compassion Connection, Box 36C, Denver, Colorado, 80236.